those issues that Keir Starmer has had with his welfare reforms. He's definitely not the first leader to run into difficulties while grappling with that subject. So why do governments find this such a tricky area to legislate on? And is it even harder when Labour is in office? Well, let's speak to Deven Ghelani from Policy in Practice, which is an organisation which helps people navigate the benefit system, and he's also written extensively on welfare policy. Well, Deven, thank you for joining us this morning. Do you think welfare reform is more difficult when Labour's in power rather than rather than the Conservatives?
I think if you're looking at savings-led reform, which I think is the kind of reform that this government's been trying to implement, then yes, it is, because I think Labour MPs expect something different. So savings-led reform is where you're thinking about, well, how can I take money out of this system as quickly, as cost-effectively as possible? There is an alternative, which I think Labour backbenchers would support, which is something that's much more reform-led. If you think about people's experience of the benefit system, if you talk about people who've dealt with it, it's rarely positive. I often know what answer I'm going to get when I say, how was your experience of claiming universal credit or claiming personal independence payment? So there are reforms that people do want to see that are going to make the system easier for people to deal with day to day. But the trouble is, to get savings that way takes time. And I think what we've seen with this government is they have been implementing savings-led reform, and that's where they've hit great difficulty with their own MPs.
Why do you think they've been so keen to reform the benefit system right at the start of their term in office?
Well, I think the outlook for particularly disability and health-related benefits is one of the big problems of this government, of whichever government was going to come in. And to be fair to the Labour Party, it's not entirely a problem of its own making. You've seen trends in disability benefits going up and up, particularly since the pandemic, but even just before. So it's not a problem of their own making, but whichever government's in power today has to look at it, because we're going to be spending, I think, around £100 billion on disability-related benefits by the end of this Parliament. Now, to put that into context, that sounds like a lot, but actually, as a share of GDP, it's within the bounds of what we've been spending on disability benefits in the past. So, as a share of GDP, it's just about tolerable. The bigger issue that I think this government's got is trying to do that in an era of very low growth. So it needs to get growth up to be able to pay for it. It's doing it in the context of wanting to spend money, needing to spend money elsewhere. So you've got defence spending, you've got debt interest going up. It wants to spend money on health-related support and employment-related support, which I think does make sense in the context of changes to disability benefits. But it's because you've got obviously the pensions triple lock, which is committed to continuing. But that's something that, again, you can make different choices in this space. And this government seems to be tackling disability benefits in a kind of cost savings-led way is going to upset its own MPs. Whereas I think if it approached it in a much more reform-led approach, trying to make the system work better for people so they didn't end up on disability benefits in the first place, that would be hugely appealing to everyone. But the savings take time to come through. You're not going to get the same level of savings across this Parliament. So that's the trade-off the government's fighting with.
Do you think when it comes to welfare reform, there are just always going to be winners and losers and a certain amount of controversy around that? Or do you think it doesn't necessarily have to go that way?
The only way to avoid it is if you're reforming the benefit system in a time of abundance, in a time of where you can actually afford to spend more money on it. I was part of the team that developed universal credit at the Centre for Social Justice, and I remember when it first got put forward in 2012-13, this is over 10 years ago now, people thought it was a great idea because they could see the problems with the legacy system. But when you're trying to put any reform through in practice, the devil's in the detail, and all of the problems arise when you actually start to talk about what you actually want to do. And remember, that was also in an era of cuts. So what got mixed up with reforming the system, trying to put something better in universal credit, which I think you're starting to see it's a better system on which to build than the one it replaced. You also had lots of people, mixing it up with the benefit cap, with freezes in benefits, with and from a practical sense, that's what they're seeing. They're seeing they're not being able to afford as much, and I think you have to protect the poorest if you're going to reform. If you're going to make sensible reforms to the benefit system, otherwise it ends up costing you more elsewhere. So if you're taking money away from the poorest people, it's going to end up costing you more in social care, in people just not being able to live independently as much.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your thoughts on that. Deven Ghelani there, who is an expert on welfare policy. Now, it is 2 months since Pope